Chapter 4. Justin shook his head as he watched the raven-haired woman rise and walk away from the table. She was a spitfire for sure, and nice to look at. But that didn't mean he wanted to share his space with her. He had come here to get away from couples and love, and the last thing he needed was to be thrown into this small space with a woman. A very attractive, aggravating woman. Okay, here it is, and it's exactly what I said. She waved a piece of paper at him. He stood. Can I see it? There was no use making a trip just to get there and find out this woman had been mistaken. She cocked a raised eyebrow at him, her expression a challenge. You don't believe me? Justin shrugged. He didn't trust a lot of people, and women usually grace the top of the list of people he didn't trust. I don't even know you, but I've proven my contract was right. It's only fair you show me yours. Her lips pursed together, though the corners twitched. Her blue eyes twinkled at him. I assume you're still talking about my contract. He replayed his words in his head, smirking a little when he realized what he'd said. So, she had a sense of humor. That was refreshing, as his ex-wife hadn't seemed to. Well, unless you considered her leaving him for her Botox doctor, a sense of humor. Still, he wondered if this stranger could take what she dished out. I was, unless you had another suggestion. Her posture stiffened, and her smile faded as a light pink color floated across her face. No, I most certainly did not. Here. She thrust the paper at him as if his words had lit it on fire. He scanned it, but her contract appeared as valid as his. Satisfied? Her rigid demeanor had returned, the humor gone. Not really. I was hoping to unwind. But instead, I have to get this fixed with a woman I don't know. He stepped toward the front door. Ava. What? He turned back to her. My name is Ava. If we're stuck together, we might as well use names. He couldn't care less about her name. His hope was the rental company would figure this out and relocate one of them, even if it was him. He didn't care what cottage he stayed in, as long as he was the only one in it. Justin, he said, but he didn't offer his hand. Can we go now? By all means, lead the way. Sarcasm flowed out of her voice, but Justin didn't take the bait. He simply wanted to get this cleared up and get away from her. He headed toward his car, but the woman stepped toward the other car as they exited the cottage. Where are you going? I'm parked right here. She crossed her arms. I don't know you. I'm not getting in a car with you when you might be some serial killer or something. I'm not a... Justin sighed and shook his head in frustration. I'm not a serial killer. I'm a producer and the host of Who Wants to Marry a Cowboy? She blinked at him, her expression deadpan. Is that supposed to mean something to me? This reaction was exactly why he needed a new job. He didn't even care if it was just producing, though he preferred being in front of the cameras. But he needed something that people knew, some job that would allow him to be recognized. It's a reality dating show. We've been around for 10 years. Ava shrugged. I don't watch much television. I'm a writer, so I'm more focused on my own stories. A writer? That piqued his interest slightly. He wondered what she wrote, but only briefly. Unless she was a screenwriter who worked for a large studio and could get him an acting job, he doubted they would have much in common. Though he thought it silly. If she wanted to drive herself, he wasn't going to stop her. Suit yourself. I'll see you there. Ava shook her head as she climbed into her own car. Not only was he a distraction, but Justin was a piece of work. Why wasn't he staying at some fancy schmancy hotel instead of at this little cottage? Maybe his money was all a facade. He seemed like the type to want to have prestige and therefore pretended he did in hopes of fooling people. She shook her head as she opened her door. She didn't know him, so she shouldn't be judging him, but he certainly made it hard not to. He was already parked at the rental office when she arrived, but he hadn't gone in yet. He opened his car door just as she did. Was he afraid of little old Margie? Or was it just that he hoped a unified front might help their case? Ava pulled on the door handle, but it didn't budge. It was locked in the middle of the day? "What's the problem?" Justin asked, coming up beside her. "It's locked." She cupped her hands around her face and leaned closer, but she could see no movement inside. "What? That's not possible. I just came from here 15 minutes ago." As if he thought the problem was just her strength, he pulled on the door handle himself. "Maybe you were the last client for the day." "At just past noon? That makes no sense." He pulled again on the handle and then began banging on the glass. Of course, he thought brute strength was the answer. "Maybe she took a break. Regardless, no one is in there. Let's just go back and call. We can leave a message to have her return the call when she gets back in." "And then what? I came for peace and quiet." Ava's fuse burned again. Did he know how obnoxious he was? Or was that just his character flaw? She flashed a tight-lipped smile at him as she bit her words out. "Well, lucky for you, I need quiet to write as well. We can figure out a schedule for the main room and avoid each other as much as possible until this gets fixed." He stared at her for a moment before rolling his eyes and sighing. "Fine, I guess we don't have much choice." At that moment, Margie appeared from the side of the building. "Ava, so good to see you again. Oh, and Justin, too. I hope you weren't waiting long." She inserted the key and pulled open the front door, seemingly oblivious to their stiff postures. Come in, come in. To what do I owe this pleasure?" "Pleasure? You double-booked us." Justin's angry voice carried over her shoulder as they stepped into the office, and Ava silenced him with a pointed stare. She tried for a calmer tone. "Justin's right, Margie. Evidently, we both got approved for the cottage this week, and, that doesn't really work for us. I need quiet to work, and I need my own space," he finished for her. Margie's face wrinkled in concern. "Oh, dear, I'm so sorry that happened. Can I see your contracts?" Ava and Justin handed their papers over, and Margie scanned them. "It does appear we made a mistake. My assistant must have booked this one without me knowing." Ava glanced around, but she saw no other desk, nor a place for one. "We don't care who made the mistake," Justin said, stepping forward. "We just want it fixed. Surely you have another cottage one of us could take instead?" "I'm afraid not," Margie said. "We're booked solid." "But we can't both stay there," Ava said. "It wouldn't be proper." "I'm sure you can work something out," Margie said with a slight smile. "It does have 2 bedrooms, and while we'll be happy to refund if it doesn't work out, our policy is 3 days. "What kind of policy is that?" Justin asked, stepping forward. Ava placed a restraining hand on his arm. "We can figure something out for 3 days." He glanced down at her hand and his voice softened. "Fine, 3 days." "Good luck, you two," Margie called as they exited the office. As they climbed in their separate cars, Ava thought they would need a lot more than luck. Suddenly, she wondered if she might have more luck reaching Margie without Justin's abrasive personality filling the room. She opened her car and headed back toward the front door of the office. He rolled down his window and shot her an inquisitive look. "What are you doing?" "Go ahead," she said with a wave. "I'll be right behind you. I just forgot something." With a curt nod, he rolled up his window and backed out of the parking lot. Ava pulled the door open and stepped inside. "Margie, did you forget something, dearie?" "I just thought," she sighed as she tried to form the diplomatic words she wanted to say. "I know Justin can be blunt, and that was putting it mildly. But we really can't stay in the same cabin. Surely there's something you can do." "Are you a believer, Ava?" "I am, which is why I shouldn't stay in the same cottage with him, even if it does have 2 rooms. Margie nodded. "And do you believe that God makes mistakes?" "Of course not. But what does that have to do with anything?" Margie smiled her sweet grandmotherly smile, but said nothing. Was she trying to say God had made sure they were double-booked? But why would he do that? It was clear she and Justin were nearly complete opposites. "All right, well, Thank you, Margie, and please call if something opens up sooner. Bewildered by the exchange, Ava left the office for the second time and headed back to the cottage. Justin was sitting at the table scowling when she entered. Okay, so how do you propose we make this work? She sat across from him and folded her hands together on the table. Sweet. She would be sweet. Well, my best writing time is in the morning, and while I could write in my room, the view in the main room is more inspiring. So you want me to stay out of the main room the whole morning? Justin's face morphed into a portrait of contempt. Nope. Sweet flew out the window, and she glared at him. This wasn't how she had planned to spend her time at the cottage either. No, but if that could be quiet time until lunch, that way I could still get writing done. He matched her stare for a moment before rolling his eyes. Fine, I can make that work. I'll go surfing or something. You surf? She couldn't picture him surfing. Even the jeans he wore currently had a pressed line on them. She didn't know anyone ironed jeans. She certainly didn't. But then again, she didn't mind wrinkles. In fact, she was probably on a first-name basis with wrinkles, but she chalked that up to her hate-hate relationship with irons. That had started after an unfortunate burn incident she rarely discussed, except when someone noticed the odd scar on her side. I used to. She waited for him to say more, but it appeared he was done sharing. She supposed if she imagined hard enough, he did have a slight surfer air, but like someone who had spent their time that way years ago. Though he appeared to be in shape, it wasn't the lean shape of a surfer, more the muscular shape of a gym rat. Well, at least if he was outside, she might still get some work done. It wasn't how she planned it, but it might be doable if he kept up his end of the bargain. All right, as long as you stay out of my food and my drinks. Justin's eyes fell to the table. You did bring your own food, didn't you? Yeah, some. My boss booked this cottage for me. He shrugged. I assumed food would be supplied. Of course he did. He probably thought they cleaned the place too. Obviously, he hadn't read the contract. Ava wondered why his boss had booked the cottage. Was this a reward or a punishment? But I can go get more, he continued. There's a town not too far from here. That would be a good idea, as I only brought enough for myself. I wasn't planning on feeding Hollywood's elite. Ugh, what was it about him that brought out the worst in her? She wasn't generally so snarky. Justin chuckled. I'm certainly no Hollywood elite. So what do we do? Shake on it? Works for me. Ava stuck out her hand and he took it. She was rather surprised not to feel utter revulsion at his touch, since everything else about him bugged her immensely. Right, well, I'll get out of your hair and go buy more groceries. He stood and shifted from one foot to the other. Was he nervous? It was the first chink she had seen in his cocky demeanor. You'll have to free up a shelf for me, though. And the chink was gone. He tossed the comment at her as he walked out the door, so there was no chance for her to respond. Probably a good thing anyway. She doubted her response would have been very Christian. With a shake of her head, she stood and walked to her room to retrieve her laptop. Once back in the main room, she settled into the comfy chair and opened her laptop. The cursor blinked at her expectantly. How she hated that cursor lately. She placed her fingers on the keys, willing the words to come, but still no creativity flowed. Instead, all she saw was Justin's perfect hair, his haughty eyes, and his cocky smile. Oh, great. Now, not only was he a distraction, but he was invading her thoughts as well. But perhaps she could use that to her advantage. Maybe she could write her frustrations with him into her novel. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Yes, there was the story, tugging slightly at the back of her mind. She coaxed it forward, promising it grandeur if it would come into the light, and it did. A small smile graced her lips as her fingers began flying across the keys. Only twice did she look up, once to admire the ocean, and once when the door opened and Justin slipped back inside.